Good evening and welcome to Tata Literature Live Business Shastras. This is a series in which we invite business leaders and management gurus to share their insights, vision and expertise through conversations and discussions. Our previous sessions have all drawn a large number of people who have been thoroughly engaged in listening to the discussions. I'm sure today will be no different. We feature this evening an inspiring new book, The Victory Project, 6 Steps to Peak Potential. The co-authors are Saurabh Mukherjea, founder of Marcellus Investment Managers, and Anupam Gupta, chartered accountant and investment research consultant. They will be in conversation with Shinjini Kumar, banker and former country business manager, Consumer Bank, Citibank, India. After the conversation, there will be a Q&A session with the authors, so do send in your questions. 5 selected questions will get a gift coupon from Tata Click, so that's an added incentive. I'll now hand you over to our panelists for what I'm sure will be an engrossing session. Shinjini, all yours. Shinjini? Shinjini, where are you? Shinjini, all yours.
Thank you, Anil, and I want to start out by saying a big thank you to Anil and Mr. Bhatt and Tata Literature Live for inviting me to do this. The first good thing that happened is that I read a very interesting book, and I want to start there. Hi, Anupam. Hi, Saurabh.
Hi, there.
I want to just start out by talking a little bit about simplicity because it is one of the core things that I have always been interested in. And it stayed with me because you really emphasize simplicity as one of the key, foundations of the 6 habits that, lead you to peak performance. You go back to it again and again. Now, I have considered myself a, lifelong outsider in the financial system. And I always felt like financial systems and language and interface and products were complex, partly because very smart people work in financial services like you and Anupam. And then I started reading your book and you started talking about simplicity. So I was actually very tempted to start there and to ask you to simplify the book for us because I'm sure many of us haven't read it. So can you just start out by telling us a little bit more about the book in a simple way?
So thank you very much for inviting us. Thank you to Tata Lit Live and thanks Shinjini for hosting us today. So just to clarify at the outset, if you are an outsider in the world of finance, then I think Anupam and I, are sort of, should be in the jungles because in the decade that I've lived in this city, I've seen you as one of the most senior people in the financial services industry. But let's focus on answering the question on simplifying the book. So the book basically, the crux of it is that across various fields, across countries, across various eras, the drivers of outsized success, we submit, we hypothesize are very similar, right? Instinctively, one would believe outsized success in any country, in any era, would be about facets like creativity, intelligence, hard work. What we have done is, whilst we do believe that creativity and intelligence, hard work plays a role, what we have tried to do is put it in a sequence of steps, right? And we've submitted in the book that mastering, achieving expertise, achieving outsized success, living up to your potential, basically is a 2-tier framework. The first tier of the simplicity paradigm framework, which we have laid out in the Victory Project, the first tier of the framework focuses on building the building blocks, on creating the building blocks of success, which is choose a field in which you want to specialize, build simple rules for success. This is typically done with the help of a mentor or a guru. Achieve a degree of maturity and spirituality about what you're doing. Those are the building blocks: specialization, simplification. And then the more advanced layer of the book is about the higher skills: creativity, teamwork, combining creativity and teamwork in a common construct, right? And what we have given in the book is case studies from fields as varied as martial arts to banking, sports, to poetry, and shown that this framework of achieving expertise, achieving outside success, this straightforward framework where you start with specialization, simplification, move towards creativity and teamwork, this works across countries, across disciplines, and across eras.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to the checklist and the framework that you talk about, because that indeed is the crux of the book, and something which should attract people to read. But I wanted to actually turn to Anupam and ask a question which is a bit more personal. What prompted you to write this book? What prompted both of you to write this book? In chapter 4, you talk about it, and chapter 4 is titled, I think it's Connecting to Yourself, to Your Inner Self. So, is that what this is about? Like some sort of catharsis, because you're both senior financial services professionals, and you write about, connecting with yourself, and you put this out into this framework. So what prompted the book?
Okay, so first of all, again, thank you very much, Shinjini. Thank you to Tata Literature Live, to Anil, Dharker, to Harish Bhatt, and everybody. I mean, to me, it's a very big moment. It's a very big honor to be associated with Tata Literature Live. Saurabh, of course, has written many books. I am the co-author, and this has just been very lucky. To answer your question, so Shinjini, this is more of a logical conclusion to the time that we spent for the better part of the last decade. I started working with Saurabh back in 2013, 2014 when he was at Ambit, and we were exploring different facets of the stock markets from a very different perspective, not from the usual buy this stock, sell this stock, buy that sector, sell that sector. This is the mid 2010s that we're talking about, 2014, 2015, where the way that investors would look at companies to invest in, whether it was the buy side or whether it was the sell side, was very straightforward. You would have annual reports, you would have PE multiples, and once you go in depth into that, you're sorted. You didn't really require much. And then when Saurabh had entered the markets a few years before that, he noticed that there's something off in the markets, because there's a very large the number of companies that actually deliver returns is very small. So that grain of thought then went on to build a lot of thematic research at Ambit. So in 2014 is when when Saurabh came up with the idea of the coffee can portfolio, which is a concept that goes back to a very large mutual fund in the US, an elite set of companies that deliver stellar financial performance and therefore great stock price performance. Because if you're doing good on the financial metric, then obviously your stock will deliver. That's quite logical. We investigated these companies using that construct by Robert Kirby of the Capital Group, and it's shocking, right? Because India has some 2.5, or maybe it has 5,500 listed companies on the Bombay Stock Exchange, out of which about 2,500-3,000 are traded, but only eight or about 10 companies could actually deliver these results year after year. Just basic stuff: 10% sales growth and 15% ROE. From there, we wrote about these companies. We investigated what we would call the reasons behind their greatness. Then Saurabh went on to write a book called Coffee Can Portfolio with two of his colleagues about how these companies can help you achieve your financial goals. So he's written these two books. What we then got to thinking, this was, I don't know if you remember Cafe Zoe at Lower Parel. It was a wonderful cafe, outstanding, food, coffee, breakfast, and me and Saurabh have had, I forgotten the number of cups of coffee, good, bad, ugly. So we were sitting there at Zoe, and then we posed this question to ourselves: if the companies are great, is there a lesson for life in general in India? So we've had all sorts of books written on productivity in the US, and that imported wisdom is then gotten out here. I mean, I'm sure you've read many of those books. But how about something that's very Indian in its perspective? That's where the whole process started. That if this elite set of companies can deliver these kind of results, then obviously there is something for all of us to learn, right? So that's the genesis of this idea.
So, Anupam, I'm very tempted to ask you a follow-up question before I go back to Saurabh, and that is about the companies that are not in that don't make it to that list. So, how do you explain this? The numbers that you just said, 5,000 companies, but only a small handful that deliver this consistent performance. Because your book is about individual peak potential, but also, I guess, corporate peak potential is something that is reflecting in the story that you're just sharing. So, and I remember that excitement of that time that you're talking about, and you reminded us of Cafe Zoe, which was really a great place. Maybe that's why, maybe we would have run into each other sometime. Yeah. So tell me what happened. So it's like the Cafe Zoe story. Great place, starts, everything going for it, and still has to shut down. So what happens to the companies that don't deliver that performance consistently, and what is the lesson for them?
I'm going to divert that to Saurabh because he does this for a living. I don't. Saurabh, all yours.
This is a super question. So, Shinjini, in a way, the story of corporate India is the story of life for all of us, right? So, if you take cricket, there's a Virat Kohli who presumably earns tens of millions of dollars a year, and then there are thousands of Ranji Trophy cricketers who toil away in the fields of India for a few lakhs a year, right? And that's exactly how corporate India functions. There's 20 companies, India's 20 largest companies today, including TCS from the Tata Group. India's 20 largest companies today take home 70% of the nation's profits, right? And this trend has actually been the story of India in the last 30 years. So back in 1991, the top 20 companies in India took a mere 15% of the country's profits. From 15, we've come to 70. I suspect by the time our careers are done, yours, Anupam, I reckon the top 20 companies in India will take home 80% of the nation's profits. So basically, just like in cricket or in tennis, there's a Roger Federer and there are thousands of ATP professionals. The same story is true for corporate life. But that does not mean that the other companies in the IT world who are not a TCS should not aspire to be the best versions of themselves. And life, in a way, can be lived very happily like this, right? Anupam and I might never be, successful authors like, say, a Chetan Bhagat or a Jeffrey Archer, taking the mainstream authors. Anupam and I might never sell books on that scale, but that doesn't mean we should not aspire to be the best authors we can. Now, the question is, if we want to be the best versions of ourselves, if we want peak potential, how do we get there? Right? And like many other middle class Indian people, we have digested hundreds of self-help tomes. The Victory Project brings together the distillation after 20 years of hard knocks in the boardrooms of Bombay. The Victory Project distills what are the 6 steps you can take to live up to your full potential. If your full potential makes you a Virat Kohli, all power to you. But if your full potential makes you a Anupam or a Saurabh, that's still pretty good, I think.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Yeah, it is. And in fact, you reminded me of something from your own book, which is in the, Gurcharan Das's Prelude, where he talks about this Kavade, right? The person the office boy from whom he learned a lot because he was the best version of himself, right? And that's very true. I wanted to ask you, now that we are talking about the book and the writing of it and the coffee cups, there's a lot of reference of coffee drinking while writing the book. And I wanted to ask you, what was the process like? Like, collaboration is great to, is another great value that you talk about. And for me personally, I've found collaboration to be one of the, lowest hanging fruits as far as strategy is concerned. You start collaboration and things immediately begin to improve, outlook improves, productivity improves. So how do two people collaborate on a book, and what do you do? How do you take decisions? Do you fight? Do you contradict each other? What do you do?
So I think, Shinjini, we had the book pretty much broken down and laid out in terms of the work that Saurabh was doing and the work that I was doing. Thankfully, I didn't have much of the heavy lifting to do. The intellectual framework and a lot of the writing actually came from Saurabh. I think so. The way that we worked this out was that uh, we would divide the writing duties between ourselves. Saurabh would write the bulk of the chapter. I would just see nooks and crannies, places where I thought that I could add certain material. And of course, there was also a whole lot of fact checking to do, a lot of referencing to do, because this book has, I think, references to about 150 or more than 200 books outside of the stuff that we were writing. And it also, we also share a lot of our experiences from it. So each and every chapter where Saurabh would write about something from his life, I would then try to see if there's any anecdote from my life that I could write. So that would be my role out there. The various, so then Saurabh would say, set up the meetings with the 8 or 10 experts that we have in the book. I would then, and this was in fact the best part of the book for me was actually recall. So we used a voice recorder for all the interviews we had, obviously with the consent of the person that we were interviewing. And I would listen to those conversations more than 2 to 3 times to get and to manually write the transcript. I know that you have apps like Otter which can give you the transcript straight away. But the sheer amount of knowledge that we would glean from these meetings, from a Sanjeev Bikhchandani, from a Professor Sanjay Bakshi, from an Apurva Purohit, from a Jason Was, from a Ramdev Agrawal, recalling all that, writing the transcripts and writing the essays was my part, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So that's the way that the two of us collaborated on the book. Saurabh.
Look, I would love to say that there was a light bulb moment where the 6 steps sort of revealed themselves to Anupam or to me. But I found that life seldom is like that, and as we explain in the book, even for creative geniuses like Satyajit Ray or William Wordsworth, we've described in the book that the creative process itself seems to be something that can take decades sometimes. So in the book we've explained how memory plays a central role in creativity, and this was an eye-opener for us as we read up on the subject of creativity. It turns out that memory plays a central role in creativity because you can carry a concept in your head for decades before the light bulb comes on. So it's actually happened to me with relation to one of the concepts Anupam described. So in the early 90s, my parents migrated to the UK in the early 90s, and I ended up working through my college years. So I used to work in a bookmaker's shop, in a betting shop through my college years. And every morning, a British guy would come, he would put his bet on, and then he would take the bus to the office. And over the course of the day, hundreds of people would come and place their bets with me. But I saw this guy who comes first thing in the morning, he inevitably wins. Right? So I one day summoned up my courage and I asked him, how do you do this? How do you place one bet and pretty much win every day? So he told me that, look son, I've been doing this for the last 20 years. I wake up at 5 o'clock, I read the sports pages of 3 newspapers with a cup of coffee. And because I've done this for so long, I can see patterns in sports that others can't. So for example, he said, whenever India plays at Lords, this is a British guy, he said, whenever India plays at Lords, I know that Dilip Vengsarkar gets 100. So when India comes to play in England, I put a bet that Dilip Vengsarkar will score 100 at Lords. So that concept stayed with me, that if you read material over long periods, you start seeing patterns that the rest of the people can't. So then in 2013, one of my friends, one of my mentors, a gentleman called Sanjay Bhattacharya, he told me to read Rob Kirby's paper, Coffee Can Investing. The paper was written in 1984, and it says that look at companies over 10-20 years and buy a handful of them and stay invested for a decade or more. And I said, my God, it works in betting, it works in investing. We've got to figure out how to do this, right? Because if it works in betting in the UK and it works in investing in America, it'll work in India, right? So that insight that looking at data, whether it's data on sports, on corporate results, or indeed on politics, if you look at patterns over very long periods of time, you start seeing the world very differently, and in the context of our practical job, we can make money from that. So memory and creativity are linked, and in our case, Anupam and I had worked on this subject of superior corporate performance, superior investment performance for so long, that finally when we were writing this book through 2019, 2020, it all came together. I think we also have to give credit where it's due. Early on, as we began this process, the Ken, which is an online
Ashish.
so they reached out and they asked us to write a series of pieces. So we wrote 6 or 7 pieces for the Ken, and that process of writing those pieces also helped Anupam and me crystallize my thinking. And then finally, over the last year and a half, we put the book together.
Very interesting. And I know that those interviews that Anupam talked about are really the, one of the best parts of the book to read, just because they are peppered with so much insight and delivered in a very interesting, casual fashion, which makes the most impact as well. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, there's the other theme in the book that runs through, which is about having a mentor or a guru. And in fact, the best way that that I remember reading it was when Manish Tabarwal talks about it and says that apprenticeship is the way to learn soft skills. And so I wanted to talk, and you talk about soft skills, you talk about the third edge, and I wanted to understand. So what do you think is this phenomenon of having the guru? Like, how do these young people who are now learning coding on White Hat Junior when they are, I don't know, 7 years old or 5 or whatever, and the whole method of learning has moved, and we are saying, instead of learning to make a shoe, I'll just 3D print a shoe, and technology is usually a march forward. How do you see that whole relationship between, you just mentioned Sanjay Bhattacharya as a guru, you talk in your book about many people and inspiration and learning. How do you see that playing out in the future? I'm just curious to understand that.
So I think mentoring and having a guru can is timeless, honestly, Shinjini. And you could do all the coding that you want, and the approach that we've taken in the book is actually comes from this book called Mastery by Robert Greene, where you start from a place where you really you identify what you want to do in life, something that appeals to you, something that you love, and then you find a guru. So I think that this role of a mentor, it's there across mythology in India also. And if you look at all the successful entrepreneurs in the US as well, you would see this recurring theme of having a mentor. The idea of a mentor is someone who's already established in his in the area that you like, but belonging to his time. And he uses that knowledge to help you, to shorten the time that you would take to learn the same thing. But obviously you have to put in that much more effort, because times have changed from the time that your mentor had learned. So I think that the mentor is important from that perspective, from having the right kind of guidance to shorten the time that you would take to become a master in your field. So that's the way that we've approached it. Saurabh?
I think simplest terms, that a mentor gives you the roadmap, right? There are millions of aspiring, hardworking, talented people in our country. Everybody wants to do well in life, but obviously, like I was in my 20s, you don't quite know what to do with all your energy and your drive and your aspiration and hunger, and therefore you often meander through life, and that meandering can turn out to be quite frustrating. But a mentor does it, gives you a roadmap and says, look, this is broadly the sequence. This is broadly the sequence. If you can follow this, the world is your oyster. And honestly, that was one of the big motivations for writing the book, right? Through my 20s and even in my first 12 years in India, I learned through mistakes. As I built a network of friends like Anupam, I made fewer mistakes. As I created a network of mentors, I made fewer mistakes. And it dawned on me that if we could write a book which could help other people show a roadmap to building skill sets, building mastery, it might be helpful for them. In the process, it would crystallize our own thinking on the subject.
Yeah, in fact, that's very fair. In fact, I did read a large part of the book as that mentorship exercise, both from you as well as from the other people that you cite and people that you meet, and how they are willing to share their personal narratives, which is a very interesting way to for people to read and understand how to see through the clutter and get some clarity about their vision. But I do want to ask you a follow-up question on that. You also talk a lot about reading and how reading is a very important aspect of both creativity as well as success. I wanted to understand, again, a question relating to technology, because my personal interest is a lot in future and how this technology drives us in the future. And I wanted to understand, now that reading has become so much of an easier exercise compared to what it was for us, like it took us a number of days to read through a book and come to the crux of it. And I have one of my co-founders is a 32-year-old, very smart young woman, and she always makes fun of us because the other two always have a bookshelf in our background,
Right.
and she doesn't. And she says, this is so not fair because I read on Kindle, so I can't have that show-off bookshelf that you guys have. And I started to think about it, and I realized that the young people are also acquiring a lot of knowledge, but they're doing it in a different way. And probably they have more tools and more ability. What they do with it is different. So in that sort of future, how do you put together your 6 principles that you talk about? I know that a lot of it still holds, but I still want you to talk a little bit about it.
So look, I mean, we can only talk basis what we have seen so far. So starting with the most practical piece, every single expert we interviewed for the book, every single one turned out to be a voracious reader, right? So Manish Sabarwal has exactly your type of shelf. It's just that his shelf in the 4 walls of the room, ceiling to floor is bookshelves. He told us in his new house there will be an outhouse in the garden which will just be full of books, and that made me deeply envious of the man. But say Mohandas Pai, Sanjeev Bikhchandani, Apurva Purohit, Professor Sanjay Bakshi, every single person we met during the writing of the book turned out to be a voracious reader. Secondly, in our profession, in the investment profession, perforce we have to read. Whether we don't always have the luxury of reading good books, we have to read year after year of annual reports to understand a company. And Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's business partner, has said that in his life he has never met a smart person who does not read non-stop. Right now. Let's get to the crux of the matter, right? I'm not a neuroscientist, but we've also cited research from neuroscientists to show what happens to 2 different brains. So the most famous experiment we cited in the book is taxi drivers in London and bus drivers in London. Right? So taxi drivers in London, the black cab drivers famously have to go through the knowledge. They famously go through the knowledge, and as they go through the knowledge, neural imaging shows that their brains become far more complex. Then, as they get their black cab license and they continue driving for the next 10-20 years, they can see their brains literally expand. The neural networks in their brain get denser. Then they look at London transport bus drivers. London transport bus driver pretty much goes up and down, up and down, up and down, and his brain doesn't expand, his neural networks don't expand. And therefore they've shown over the last 10 years of neural imaging that 2 people starting out exactly at the same point in life at 21, by 31, the size of their brains and the neural density is night and day. Right? And in a way, I think that's what happens in our world as well. It's just that because mental development is something you and I can't visually see, we don't realize that 2 people who are identical at 21, at 31 can be chalk and cheese. Now, do they have to just read? Is there no other way to build neural imaging? I doubt it. There must be other ways to build neural density other than just reading. But from what we can see, the simplest way to do it is non-stop reading. And it's a superpower, especially because it's getting harder and harder for everybody, myself included, to spend my days and months reading. But the data is very clear. People who invest deeply through their 20s, 30s, 40s in reading, you do end up with literally more muscular brains. And in a way, I call it the sort of deepest tragedy. If someone goes to the gym every day, at least others can see it. And if not for any other reason, out of sheer envy, you might be prompted to go to the gym. But this piece others can't see, and therefore those who don't read don't realize what they're missing out on.
That's a lot of food for thought. In my house, it's my husband who owns most of these books. I read a lot, but I think he is the person that should have very muscular brain. From your description that I'm hearing, I should that's very interesting for me. I wanted to ask a question of Anupam, and that is coming from the checklist that the book has, because I think it's a very neat little way to say these are the things that you should think about doing, these are the things you should continue to do, these are the things you should stop doing, and that is your way to, victory. But when I read the book and I find so much of Saurabh in the book doing all good things, so much focus, discipline, reading, fitness, setting goals, achieving them, deep work. I'm very envious, because I'm thinking I don't think I check many of those boxes. So Anupam, can you tell us if Saurabh really does all of those things, or can you just tell us some interesting tales? Does he lounge around sometimes till noon, or watches shows on Netflix, or something not?
From whatever little I know of him, I can only reveal that he's got a fetish for cookies. He needs to have he has tons of these cookies along with his coffee. I don't have even sugar with my coffee given my size, but Saurabh's got this thing for that. But
So,
other than that,
I'm having chocolate brownies made by my daughter as
Right.
we.
that's my case. But other than that, no, I can't think. I mean, I can't really think of anything much beyond that.
Oh my God. Okay. So Saurabh, your all goals. Please do tell us that there is something that Anupam doesn't know that you need to still work on.
Extremely boring middle class insecure Indian who has to he has to wake up in the morning and believe that today I will make something of myself. But on a more candid note, on a more revealing note, I wish I could manage my time as well as we have revealed it in the book. Yes, I'm not on social media, and I have a really broken down, clapped out 6-year-old phone where it's even hard to talk properly, let alone send text messages. But my biggest sort of sin is I try to cram too many things into a day, and as a result, rather than being in a mood to meditate or in a shape to meditate by 8 in the evening, I'm completely smashed by 8 in the evening. So I need to get a grip on my own scheduling after all this holier than thou talk we have put in the book.
Yeah, I can see that, because I'm one of those people who wakes up every morning and says this is going to be a better version of me, and by evening I'm like, did I do it? And okay, but I think that checklist is very helpful, and the only reason I wanted to share stories is because all of us need to work on things, and I guess that comes through. I wanted to ask you a question, but I wanted to read a little bit from the book before that. This is from page 152. This is a chapter titled Develop Your Creativity and Memory, and it starts with a quote from George Bernard Shaw. It says, "The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable man persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man." It's a very, creativity in your book is a very important chapter, because, on the one hand, you're talking about all the rational things that can be done with a checklist. And on the other hand, you also want people to work on their creativity, and memory is one conscious way to do it, but a lot of creativity is eccentric. And I know we spoke a little bit about it, but I do want to push you a little bit to say, is it possible to tame that wild tiger, which creativity seems to be?
So I think it is. I think this is one of the central myths we have sought to dispel in the book. The notion that creativity is something that happens as in a flash of a moment and a burst of inspiration and so on. So we've given examples of William Wordsworth and so on. But let me put it in a different way, right? So I'm a big Satyajit Ray fan. Satyajit Ray had a 35-year career, 34 movies, I think, in a 35-year career. And obviously lifetime achievement Oscar. So it's not just that he made 1 or 2 good movies. This man made a movie a year through the 55. I think was Pathir Panchali was 54, 55, and from then till his death, he literally made 1 movie a year. When we were doing a webinar somewhere in Southeast Asia on the book, a guest told us that Woody Allen, who has a similar track record, 35 movies in a 35-year career, 22 of which are Academy Award winners, right? Last week, so every Sunday morning, in Marcellus, we publish a list of the most interesting things we read in that week. Last week, we published a summary of a Jerry Seinfeld transcript, right? So Jerry Seinfeld, probably the most successful comedian in America in the last 30 years. And, this was Tim Ferriss. Tim Ferriss asked him, what's the secret of your success? And Jerry Seinfeld said, every morning I sit down and I force myself to write, 1,000 words. And every day I revisit what I've written the day before, and I improve it, and I improve it, and I improve it. And I improve it in the knowledge that if I don't do this, I won't be relevant as a comedian, right? Staying with comedy, Chris Rock, right? Chris Rock does, before he comes on broadcast TV and does his super hit shows, he does 100 to 150 comedy shows in small nightclubs and restaurants. That's where he perfects the jokes, right? So even comedy comes from process. Great cinema comes from process, right? And in fact, in the book, In Victory Project, we have cited a lovely little book by an American guy called Mason Curry. The book is called Daily Rituals. It gives you the schedules, the timetables of 250 giants of creativity, right? So philosophers, artists, poets, and with all of these giants of creativity, right, including Sir Ernest Hemingway, including Renaissance painters, the work schedule is non-stop, and the work schedule is wake up early, get to work early, take a break at noon for an hour, hour and a half, review your work in the afternoon, right? So different people have slightly different schedules, but we're still looking for that creative person who sort of, takes it easy, and then, over a casual glass of wine suddenly has this brilliant idea which transforms the world. So far from what we have seen in both our practical lives and in our reading and research, creativity seems to be an incredibly process-driven endeavor, contrary to popular belief, including we've cited in the book, William Wordsworth writing the poem Daffodils, and how process-driven that journey was. So it's remarkable, right? I suppose what we get lost in is the marketing. If I am a poet and I would like to become famous one day as a poet, I have to show it to Shinjini and Tata Lit Live as if, I'm living this incredibly bohemian lifestyle, and poetry is something I do, when the inspiration comes to me. How sad would it be if I told you that poetry too is process driven? I appreciate that. It's the mysteries in the mysteries in selling the intuition and the romance, but the success lies in the process.
I really need an ally at this stage to kind of spar with you. And Anil is on silent, but when he comes back, then I do want to hear a little bit more on this from both sides. Now, I do agree that the process and the output is very important, because there is no output without the process. I mean, you can have the best ideas in your brain. Yeah. And the way I've always thought about this is the difference between Sherlock and Mycroft, right? Like, one manages to use that same brilliance and intuition to the benefit of humanity around him, and the other having an even brighter, brain and intuition doesn't. So I agree that it does take process to convert your brilliance into output, but I also find it hard to believe that the process itself is more important. But I guess you're not saying that either, so I'm just going to let this drop here and move the subject, unless you want to add something.
I think the only sort of, if I want to be provocative, what we are saying is the lazy genius.
Yeah.
Lazy genius who succeeds big time is a myth.
Yeah.
The lazy genius who succeeds big time is a myth, and not just a myth in modern day India, but myth for an all-time myth. And whether it's Charles Dickens or whether it is Chetan Bhagat, the writing that has made them what they are is born out of huge craft and process and applied skill sets over 20-30 years. Because we see the end result, we think, my God, this is just born out of sheer intuition, but actually it's born out of sheer craft and practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the only thing that I worry about sometimes is when people do a brilliant first book or first movie, and the second one is absolutely not the same, and then you say, okay, practice didn't really take this further. But I guess...
Can I come up with the alternative hypothesis?
Yeah.
After the first movie, after the first book, the success meant that there was a diminution in effort and industry. But that being said, what you're saying is something in it, because clearly if you see, and the example which haunts me forever is R.D. Burman and Teesri Manzil, right? Because I think Teesri Manzil is a defining in Indian cinema and in Bollywood music. Teesri Manzil is the watershed, right? Bollywood cinema and music changed, and we have cited the case study. R.D. Burman changed Bollywood. The song and dance spectacular came alive with O Hasina Zulfo Wali. And whilst he was very successful through the 70s, the first Teesri Manzil wasn't his first movie, but it was his first blockbuster movie. I don't think that sheer, undiluted quality of Teesri Manzil came through in the subsequent 70s hits. In the Western context, Michael Jackson, what he did in Beat It, I think, Bad and the subsequent albums in the 90s could not reach that sheer sort of epic brilliance of that one album. So yes, and there is something to be said. You work for 20 years and then you get your first chance and you put your life's work on the table, and that becomes your all-time high.
And then if you let process take over, then sometimes it can diminish. I don't know. It's a mysterious.
So we'll look into this if we get a chance to write again. This is something actually we will explore. It's a very interesting topic you've raised.
No, that is fun, and I'm just hoping that we will have some questions. I think, how much time do we have? We have a very short time between us. I have a few questions here, but let me just ask you a couple more questions before we get to the audience questions. And I had a couple of questions here for relating to the market, and I know that I'm not going to start with the market question. I'm going to start with D.H. Lawrence. And let me just tell you, because I studied English literature, Lawrence was one of the most fascinating writers when I was a literature student, and I was very, how should I put it, amused to see him introduced as a poet rather than a writer. But obviously he was a genius and he did so many things so well. I'm really curious to know, how did a D.H. Lawrence reference come into a chapter on financial markets? I want to just address the audience here, and I want to tell them that this reference occurs in a section.
I reckon the human mind's greatest weakness is to get lost in the abstract, right? So to cite an example from day-to-day life, right? The D.H. Lawrence words that were quoted in the book, right? If we stare at a map long enough, the map appears to us to be more real than the land, right? And the best way to think about this is Christopher Columbus. The poor fellow stared at the map long enough. He headed out for India, rocked up in America, right? All of us who use GPS for navigation, we are the sort of more humbler cousins of Christopher Columbus. We use our GPS to set out for one place, and we end up in a sort of a dead end alley because we are using the GPS. We believe the GPS is the reality. We're not going to listen to our driver or passers-by because the GPS will take us, right? So the human man's great ability is to think in the abstract, but if you get lost in the abstract, you end up heading for India, but you end up in America, right? Now, the same thing happens in the financial markets, right? As an investor, myself, Anupam, as a podcast host in personal finance, we talk to hundreds of people every week who are completely immersed in this world of stock prices, as if there is some, great symbolism, great significance attached to the stock prices, right? If you take this fascination with stock prices to the extreme, there are people who invest basis trends they spot in stock prices, right? That's about as mad as investing basis, smoke signals coming out from right? Now, it's the same problem, right? You're getting so lost in the abstract that you believe the map is the real world. You believe that the stock price is the reality, right? So once I put it like that, you'll be able to see why getting lost in stock prices or knowing whether Nifty is today and what company's PE multiple is where is actually of zero significance. In fact, Anupam kindly referenced my preceding book, Coffee Can Investing. We've actually given charts there to show there is no correlation at all in India between PE multiples or any valuation multiple and how much money you make from the stock. But if you tell that to a typical investor who spends his whole life staring at stock prices, he will refuse to believe it. Just as if you and I had told Christopher Columbus in 1492 that look, if you head that way, it's actually going to be America, not India, he wouldn't have believed us, right? So it's the same delusion, and it crops us again and again, right? In effect, if you want to read an even better book than ours on the subject, Yuval Noah Harari.
Yeah.
Yuval Noah Harari in *Sapiens* rips apart these abstract notions many of us have about things like God, the nation state, family, quaint institutions like marriage and so on. He shreds them, and once he's done with you, you don't know which abstraction to believe in and which abstraction to actually discard.
Mm-hmm. Believe in the abstraction of communication and community and collaboration.
Nicely put, and in a way what we are doing here is actually beautiful, right? What Zoom and Teams and the last 9 months has done is translated something which was abstract communication into something which has become incredibly real, and the longer term impacts of that I think we'll only get to see in the coming years.
Yeah, and that's also Harari, right? Okay, so I think we are at the close of our time, and we have some very interesting questions coming your way. But I just got a message that we have 5 winners whose questions I'm going to read out for you to answer, and the 5 winners are winning Tata Click vouchers. So congratulations. I'm going to start with a question from Pankaj Mule, and here is the question, and Anupam or Saurabh, feel free to answer between the two of you. Do you see any pattern in decision making of top 20 company CEOs to deliver the excellent results on sustainable basis? How are these CEOs different from others?
Wow. So, we spent the better part of Unusual Billionaires profiling exactly these CEOs, whether it was Aditya Puri at HDFC Bank or whatever. So the pattern is simple, Shinjini. I think there were 3 factors, if I remember correctly. Saurabh will just can help me. The first was a relentless focus. Waking up each and every day, knowing what you have to do and not diverting from that. In India, as you know, a lot of promoters, once they get success early or wherever they are, they tend to then bid for a telecom license, for an IPL team, to start to build probably a steel plant and go in all kinds of directions. So that record is there in India to show that. That is the first one. The second one was to build a competitive advantage, and then just keep repeating that, whether it's an Asian Paints and the way that they very carefully trained their carpenters to take things forward, So those are the 2 things that I can remember. I think Saurabh can add in here.
So this is actually a chapter in Unusual Billionaires. I think it's the penultimate chapter in Unusual Billionaires, the common traits of the greatest companies in our country. And the 3 most striking ones are, as Anupam said, focus, but allied to that is simplicity, right? If you see companies which are outstanding successes, right? So whether it's an HDFC Bank, a Marico, a TCS, an Asian Paints, the core of it is they're trying to do something very simple. HDFC Bank is saying, I want to be the retail banker of choice to this country, right? They're not trying to be 50 different things. Why is this important? Because if you have a very simple corporate strategy, it's easy to explain it to the team. It's easy to implement it. If you deviate from the simplicity, you can spot the deviations easily, course correct, and come back on track, right? So simple corporate strategy implemented with great focus. Third area, decentralization of power and decision making, right? The Lala company where the promoter says, I'm the omniscient decision maker. Every key decision will be made by me or my progeny. That company increasingly is being rendered redundant in India. Decentralization of power, where you set targets for your staff, you give them authority, you give them a performance framework, you give them enabling infrastructure, and you let them go forth and conquer. One of the reasons decentralization is so powerful in India is because we're such a varied, heterogeneous market. If you try to say that out of central Bombay, I will tell the troops how to go about it, it doesn't quite work, right? And there's actually in our more recent newsletters in Marcellus, we've explained how you and I can figure out from outside which companies are decentralizing and which companies centralize power. Right? If you see a company centralize power, unusual billionaires are difficult to build. We can carry on in this discourse about things like hiring young talent, grooming them, the mentorship aspect of Victory Project coming back, right? If you see the top companies, say Asian Paints, I think in the last 40 years, no member of the C-suite has been an external recruit. Right? Great companies groom talent decade after decade after decade. I think Asian Paints, the last 5 CEOs or 6 CEOs, 6 CFOs have all been graduates straight out of business school, groomed for 30, 40 years, right? So there's other facets to it, but these are the facets which come off the top of my head. Penultimate chapter of Unusual Billionaires will give you the entire shopping list.
Very interesting. Tell me, the second question is from Narendra Saran. 20 largest companies taking 70% of profits. Recently, I read a book, Winners Take It All by Anand Girdhar Das, which picks up similar symptoms but comes to a very different conclusion. Your thoughts?
So Anand Girdhar Das is writing in the context of America. In America, it's a good book, and I think he's made a very valid point about America. He's talking about wealth concentration in America, how a small bunch of people are hoovering up American wealth. But if he were to look at India, I think he'd be shocked. In America, the top 20 companies take home around 30-35% of profits. Right? In India, the top 20 take home 70-75% of profits. Right? So the Americans ain't seen nothing yet. They need to come to our country to see what real concentration means, right? Now, obviously, this is an incredibly important topic. The relevance of this to our country is immense, right? Not just to corporate strategy and stock markets, the relevance from a political perspective, the relevance for how a democracy functions, right? And these are the sorts of topics where if you dedicate time, effort, you come up with very powerful insights. In fact, if you were to look at free cash flows, not just profits, free cash flows, I would say that top 20 companies are now taking home 80% of India's free cash flows. That means thousands and thousands of other companies are rocking up and doing, working hard for pittance. Now, this is a massive topic. We'll probably need, if Tata Lit Live ever invites us back, we can probably do a separate session on this. But this is going to be one of the defining themes of India in the next 10 years, the concentration of immense corporate power in the hands of 20-25 companies.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I have the third question from winner Pratik Ghosh. The question is, referring to Saurabh's example, London taxi drivers of black cabs have won Brain of Britain awards. So is the message that we should be versatile and have many interests and not focus on one thing?
Anupam, do you want to take that?
No, I just missed that. Saurabh, if you heard that, can you just take that?
Yeah, so basically what the gentleman's asking is, London taxi drivers have won the Brain of Britain awards. Clearly, they are very bright. And if you speak to a London taxi driver for 10 minutes, you actually learn more about Britain than if you were to speak to the Prime Minister, I think, for 10 minutes. But anyway, coming to the point at hand, the point you're raising, this is to the questioner, the point you're raising is very valid. And we've in the book explained what we call the T-shaped paradigm for mastery. So the T-shaped paradigm is you build your specific expertise in a specific sector industry. That's the stem, that's the vertical part of the letter T. And then the horizontal, the roof of the letter T, is the variety of interests that you cultivate. And the reason variety of interests is good is because that's where the insights come from. So David Epstein has written a gorgeous book, just outstanding book called Range, exemplifying this. And inspired by his book, we went looking for case studies of people who are like the letter T. And the case study we have used in the book, basis our reading elsewhere, is the martial arts artist, a film star Bruce Lee. So Bruce Lee superficially is a martial arts artist, but if you sort of read his life and read his biographies, this man was a master in French in fencing. He was a best-selling author. He had an enormous library, right? Imagine Bruce Lee having an enormous library, and he mastered cinema well enough for him to be able to tell Hollywood how should you direct martial arts so that on the American screen, martial arts actually becomes attractive. So the first TV shows in America to show martial arts were featuring Bruce Lee, not because he was great at karate, but because he helped Hollywood directors understand how martial arts can be slowed down and made telegenic. Right? It is ironic that to become a superstar, he had to come back to Hong Kong and enter the dragon and so on was actually made in Asia. But in a way that leads us to a different story, which is the rise of Asia in the last 30-40 years. But the T-shaped paradigm for mastery, specific specialization in one area, but a library of the sort Shinjini has, so that you cultivate a broad range of interests.
I have to tell you that London taxi drivers, or even for that matter, New York taxi drivers, or not so much Singapore, they don't talk much. But London taxi drivers are really super fun. And even when I did not have, enough money to afford it, I would take cabs just to have a nice conversation. And my friends would say, oh my God, why do you have to take a taxi in London? The tube works so well. But that reward of talking to these people was really something worth it. Yeah. So I totally sort of resonated with your London cab driver examples. We have a question from Sriram Srinivasan. Short question. It says, in a well-placed bet, how do you decide the correct time to exit? Tough question.
In a well-placed bet.
Yeah.
I presume this is in the context of the stock market.
Stock markets, yeah, that's what.
So that's simple actually. So the simple things, so I look for is firstly, so we do a lot of work on our promoters stealing money. So as soon as I see the promoter stealing money, we check out. Second thing is, we look for his dominant position. We invest in monopolies. The Marcellus philosophy is only invest in monopolies. Never ever invest in a company which is exposed to the ravages of competition, because then you'll not be investing with the 20 leaders. You'll be investing with the thousands of losers in our country. So we look to see, is the monopoly being eroded? And if we here in our discussions with distributors, dealers, customers, suppliers, the moat is being eroded, we check out. We do go and have a quiet, a nice cup of tea with the promoter. We explain our concerns. The promoter tries to assuage our concerns. We give them 6 months to remedy the situation. But if he can't, then we check out. So first is you check out when you see theft. Second is when you check out when you see erosion of a dominant position. And third is when you see that the dominant position is there, but the essentiality of the product is lost. So I call this the Kodak Test. Kodak still dominates films. It's just that none of us use Kodak to take photos anymore. We use our mobile phones. So if you see that a certain company dominates the product, but the product itself is becoming obsolete, then it's time to check out. But you don't check out basis the price, because if you check out basis the share price or the PE multiple, you're back in D.H. Lawrence territory, where the map appears to us more real than the land.
Yeah, thank you. That was crisp. Last winner question. This is from Krishiv Kapoor. How do you choose a mentor?
Oh, tough one. I think maybe Anupam's dropped out, but I was going to ask this one. This is a tough one. So I can only explain how I've done it. I've tried to figure out, in any area where I'm trying to build my body of knowledge, I've tried to figure out who are the people who know the most on that subject. And then I've sought them out. I've requested a little bit of their time. And in some cases I've been lucky, Shonja Bhattacharya. In others I haven't. Now, one little trick I've used, I'll share it with you, please keep it to yourselves, is writing books. So if you figure out that these 3-4 people are people I can learn from, then I've decided I'll write a book on this subject, and the book becomes the context in which, in a way, the mentorship takes place. Right? And that's helped me in many ways. Firstly, because the mentor realizes that whatever he's telling you will go on record, he concentrates, she concentrates, and gives you, really intense, concentrated knowledge. Secondly, as Anupam mentioned earlier in the interview, because you listen to the recording again and again, and you transcribe the recording and you learn from it, that repetition completely hammers the messages into your brain. And the third is, if you do a good job on the book and you build a rapport in the interface for writing the book, the mentor becomes your guide for many years to come. So I would love to hear a better stratagem for finding mentors. My stratagem has been simple: find the people who know most on that subject, go to them, request a little bit of your time, and write a book which helps you encapsulate and capture their knowledge in a succinct framework. You learn, their knowledge is spread to the wider world, and you emerge out of the process a little richer for what you compared to when you went into it.
That is deep. Anupam, would you like to add anything? Otherwise, I just have one fun question. We are almost at our time, but before I hand over to Anil, somebody asked this question: if we follow Saurabh's example and schedule, we will have no time left to enjoy life. Isn't there a way to strike a balance?
So I think work-life balance.
This question is from K. Sridhar.
Yeah, I think we've lost I think Anupam might have dropped off.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think Sridhar is extremely perceptive. So my spare time is also writing books. So perhaps I'm not the best person to ask about work-life balance. By the way, we do say in the book, and perhaps you expect us to say this, we say in the book the notion that work ends and leisure begins is a quaint notion. Right? Your life is your work, work is your life. The two become seamless. And when the two become seamless, you know that you're on to your path to mastery.
Yeah, and before I hand over to Anil, I must say I do agree with that, because I have found that it's hard to take your creativity and your soul into corporate workspaces because it is intimidating. But if you do, it always gives you good rewards. It gives your team good rewards, and it reflects in the overall performance. You briefly talk about it when you talk about diversity, and there's a lot of other literature around it. But I think one thing that the reason people compartmentalize it is because of this sort of intimidating presence that corporates have of saying you shall be a certain straitjacketed person. But that's breaking very fast, and I think that will probably lead to more people realizing this work and life seamlessness. And of course, this work from home and Zoom and all of this will probably help. I want to say a big thank you to you guys. It's been a really wonderful evening talking to you. And I want to hand over to Anil for any follow-up questions or comments.
Well, I expected an interesting session, but I didn't expect an entertaining session. Because the wonderful examples that were given, I think, really make business management and so on so very interesting. I particularly like the Bruce Lee example. I mean, who expected Bruce Lee to have a library? That's incredible. And perhaps that's what made him a thinking Kung Fu master, right? The fact that he expanded his intelligence. Saurabh, but your schedule is very intimidating, and I'm beginning to feel an extremely lazy kind of person. I thought I worked hard enough, but great. And Shinjini, thank you for making this so very lively and interesting. And thanks to the absent Anupam, I don't know where he's gone, but his contributions, though silent many times, very, very, very important. Thanks to all three of you for this very, very lively session. Thank you.
Thank you, Anil. Thank you, Shinjini. Thank you, Tata Did Live. It's been a great privilege to be here.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.